I still remember that morning like it was yesterday. The sun was barely over the horizon, birds chirping, and there I was, sipping my coffee, scrolling through emails like any normal person when my eyes landed on it, a letter from the HOA. At first I laughed. I mean, who actually reads HOA letters with a straight face? But something about this one felt off. It wasn't the usual, your lawn is too long nonsense. No, this one had bold, threatening language, like it had been written by someone who secretly dreamed of being a police chief. Immediate compliance required, it said. Failure to adhere may result in legal action. My first thought was legal action for parking my son's truck in our own driveway. I chuckled, shaking my head. This has to be a joke, I muttered to myself, but deep down a pit formed in my stomach. There's something about the word compliance that makes a grown adult feel like a kid caught sneaking candy. My son walked into the kitchen, stretching lazily. He glanced at the paper in my hand and smirked. What now? Are they upset because the hedge is growing faster than their patience? I handed it to him, trying to hide my unease. He read it quickly, his eyes narrowing, and then he laughed, calmly, almost too calmly. Typical HOA nonsense, he said, but there was a weight in his tone that made me pause. There was experience behind that laugh, a quiet, controlled confidence that I hadn't really noticed before. I watched him go out to the driveway to move his truck. I could see him from the kitchen window, tall, steady, unbothered by the usual neighborhood chaos. And then I saw the car pull up. It wasn't the mailman. It wasn't a neighbor. It was a sleek black sedan, moving slow and deliberate with tinted windows. My stomach dropped. I couldn't see the driver yet, but something about the way the car parked screamed wrong. The door opened. A man stepped out, dressed in what looked like an official uniform, clipboard in hand. His badge glinted in the morning sun. He walked toward my son, moving with purpose, a rigidity that made my skin crawl. I rushed outside, calling his name, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked slightly. Hey, can I help you? The man didn't answer. He just stopped in front of my son and started rattling off something about illegal parking and enforcing community regulations. His voice was sharp, urgent, almost threatening. My son didn't flinch, not a twitch. He listened quietly, arms relaxed at his sides, nodding politely but firmly. It was eerie how calm he seemed, like he was already 3 steps ahead in a game I didn't know we were playing. Then it happened. My stomach sank so hard I thought I might throw up. The man's hand moved and I saw it clearly. A gun, not a toy, not a bluff, an actual firearm. Time slowed, birds stopped chirping, even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. I froze, my mind screamed in a million directions, call 911, run, intervene, but my son, my calm, composed son, took a small step forward, not aggressive, just deliberate. He raised his hands slightly, but there was no fear in his eyes, only control. I wanted to shout to stop him, to tell him to hide, but I couldn't move. I felt frozen in place, watching this surreal scene unfold on my own driveway, my son standing tall, facing a man pointing a gun, and somehow staying calm. I realized in that moment that this wasn't just some neighborhood dispute anymore. Something bigger was coming. Something that would change everything I thought I knew about my son, about safety, about our little corner of the world. And I knew, just knew, that by the end of today, nothing would be the same again. I couldn't believe what was happening. The man with the gun, a real gun, was standing in our driveway, barking orders like he was some kind of law enforcement, all over a parking complaint. My heart was pounding so hard, I swear I could hear it in my ears. Sir, I shouted, my voice cracking, please put the gun down, this isn't necessary. He didn't even glance at me. All his attention was on my son, who was still standing there, calm and steady, like the chaos around him was nothing more than background noise. I could see the man's knuckles white as he gripped the weapon. Every word he spat out was sharp and clipped, like he was used to people following orders without question. I stepped closer, my hands raised, trying to keep a safe distance while still feeling the need to protect my son. My mind raced, thinking of every possible outcome. Does he shoot? Do I scream? Do I tackle him? Fear was gripping me and I felt completely powerless. Then my son did something that made my stomach drop even further. He tilted his head slightly, listening to the man like he was solving a puzzle. Not panicking, not flinching, just analyzing. And then he spoke. "Sir, I don't want trouble," my son said, his voice steady, controlled. "But pointing a gun at someone over a parking complaint is unwise, very unwise." I froze. Did he just say unwise? In that moment, the gun-wielding man's face twitched ever so slightly, like a crack had formed in his confidence. I noticed his eyes darting, unsure, like he suddenly realized he might not be in charge here. I wanted to yell, "Run, hide, call 911," but somehow my voice caught in my throat. I couldn't move. All I could do was watch, my stomach knotting tighter with every second. Then, without warning, the man took a step forward, his gun raised a fraction higher. My breath hitched, and I instinctively put myself in front of my son, even though I knew it probably wouldn't matter. But my son didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He stayed perfectly still, his eyes locked on the man, his entire posture radiating authority. And then, with the calmest tone imaginable, he said something that made my blood run cold. "You really shouldn't be doing that." The words were simple, almost casual, but the way he said them, it carried weight. The kind of weight that makes a grown man reconsider every decision he's made in his life. I noticed something else then, a subtle shift in the man's body language. His shoulders tensed. His grip on the gun wavered. He was suddenly calculating, trying to figure out who he was dealing with. And that's when I realized, my son wasn't just calm because he was brave, he was calm because he knew what to do. I felt a flicker of hope, but it was mixed with terror. The scene was so surreal. A fake HOA officer, a gun, my son standing there like some kind of trained professional, and me, frozen in the middle of it all, heart hammering, unsure if we'd make it out alive. I tried to think rationally. Could I call out something, distract him, do anything to de-escalate? My thoughts were racing, but no coherent plan came. All I could do was breathe, shallow and quick, trying to stay out of the line of fire. And then something unexpected happened. The man's eyes widened as if he had just realized something. Something about my son. A hesitation. A pause. His mouth opened and closed like he was trying to remember a line from a script he'd never actually learned. I held my breath. "Please, don't do anything stupid," I thought, please. And that's when my son tilted his head just slightly, a small, almost imperceptible movement, and spoke again. This time just 2 words. "You know me." The man froze completely. His gun didn't move. His voice caught. His confident swagger, the act of authority he had been so proud of, vanished like smoke in the wind. I didn't know what my son meant yet, but I had the sudden, chilling realization that we were about to find out exactly who this man had underestimated. And in that moment, I understood one terrifying truth. The real danger wasn't the gun. It wasn't the HOA letter. The real danger was what would happen if this man realized too late who he was facing. The words "you know me" hung in the air like a thunderclap. I froze, heart hammering, unable to blink. The man with the gun, our so-called HOA enforcer, stopped moving mid-step. His hand, which had been steady a second ago, wavered ever so slightly. And then I noticed it. The hesitation in his eyes, the sudden tilt of his head, like he was realizing something far worse than he had imagined. My son didn't move. He just stood there calm, arms relaxed, eyes locked on the man. That calm, that aura of control, it was disorienting. I realized with a mix of awe and terror that this was no ordinary teenager or even an ordinary man. There was history here, experience, power. And right now that power was contained in my son, standing silently in front of a man who had just pulled a gun on him. The man swallowed hard. I could see the sweat forming on his brow, his confident posture crumbling like dry leaves. "Wait, what?" he stammered. You're..." My son tilted his head slightly, speaking slowly, deliberately. "I'm exactly who you think I am." The man's mouth opened again, then shut, like he was trying to form words that refused to come. His hands trembled on the gun. I held my breath, every nerve in my body screaming that one wrong move could end this. The tension was suffocating, electric. The kind of tension you feel in movies but never expect to live through in your own driveway. And then it clicked in my mind. The casual way my son had moved, the unshakable calm under threat, the precision in his stance. Navy SEAL, that's what he was. I realized I'd never truly understood what that meant. Not the training, not the discipline, not the skill that comes with it. But right now, on our quiet suburban street, I was seeing it unfold in real time. The man's hands shook visibly now. He looked around, maybe hopping for backup, or maybe just hoping someone would save him from the mistake he had just made. I didn't know, he muttered, voice trembling. I thought you were just a kid. My son took a slow step closer. Not threatening, not aggressive, just authoritative. And you're about to learn why underestimating people can get you hurt, or worse. I felt a shiver run down my spine. My heart still raced, but I could see it, the shift in the power dynamic. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. This was a lesson, and we were about to witness it. The man's voice cracked. I'm with the HOA, enforcement, he trailed off, as if the words themselves had lost meaning. I wanted to shout to step in to tell him to drop the gun, but I couldn't. I was too paralyzed by the surrealness of it all. This wasn't just my son protecting himself, this was him protecting us. And he was calm enough, experienced enough to do it without a single misstep. He spoke again, quietly but firmly. You should have knocked, you should have called first, and you definitely should not have pulled a weapon over something that could have been solved with words. The man's grip on the gun faltered. His face turned pale, and for the first time I saw fear. Real, palpable fear, the kind of fear that comes when you realize you are completely out of your depth. I could hardly breathe. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, the sheer ridiculousness of a man trying to enforce HOA rules like he was a federal agent, only to realize he had picked a fight with someone trained to handle life-and-death situations every day. But I couldn't, not yet. The tension was still too thick, too dangerous. My son took another step forward, calm and deliberate, his eyes never leaving the man. Put the gun down, now, before this gets worse. For a moment the man froze, and then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he lowered the weapon. Every second of hesitation felt like an hour to me. I could feel my knees weaken, relief and terror mixing into a dizzying cocktail. I stepped closer cautiously, still not fully believing what had just happened. Are we safe now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My son didn't answer me directly. He was already assessing, scanning the street, checking for threats. That's when I realized this calmness wasn't just bravery. It was instinct. Every fiber of his being knew exactly what to do, and right now, the danger was neutralized not because of luck, but because of him. The man backed up slowly, muttering apologies, humiliation and fear written across his face. And I, standing there in disbelief, knew we had just survived something that could have gone horribly wrong if not for one simple fact. My son was no ordinary man. The man's hands were trembling now, his gun lowered but still clutched like a lifeline. I could see every thought racing through his mind. Panic, disbelief, and the dawning realization that he had walked straight into a nightmare he hadn't signed up for. I felt my own heart pounding so hard I thought it might shatter my chest. I wanted to step forward to calm the situation, but I knew better. My son had this under control. His calm, quiet authority was enough to hold the tension in place, and I could feel it radiating outward like a force field. Then he spoke. You think this is a joke? My son said, his voice low and measured, yet carrying a weight that made the man flinch. Pointing a gun at someone over a parking complaint, it's not just stupid, it's dangerous, and it's illegal. The man's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes darted nervously, scanning the street, maybe for backup or maybe for an escape route. But there was nowhere to go, not now. My son took a slow step closer. I could see the faint sunlight glinting off his eyes, sharp and unwavering. Do you know who you're dealing with? He asked, almost softly, but there was steel behind the words that made my blood freeze. The man froze. For the first time, I saw real fear, not the kind that comes from getting caught breaking a rule, but the kind that comes from staring into the teeth of someone who could dismantle you without a second thought. Then my son did something subtle but powerful. He shifted his stance, small, controlled, deliberate. Not aggressive, not threatening, just precise. And in that small movement, the man understood everything. He knows exactly what he's doing, I thought, my stomach knotting. And we're all lucky he's on our side. I watched frozen as the man's mouth opened again. "I didn't know," he stammered. "I thought—" His voice cracked, high-pitched, like a child caught in the act. My son didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You underestimated me. You underestimated my family, and that's a mistake you won't forget anytime soon." The man's hand shook, and I noticed a small bead of sweat running down his temple. Every inch of his posture screamed surrender. He was completely out of his element. And yet, he still had that stubborn pride, the last shred of someone clinging to authority he didn't have. I could hardly breathe. I wanted to step in, to yell at him to leave, to tell him everything would be fine, but I couldn't. The sheer force of my son's presence held me back. I realized with a shiver that this wasn't just about him. It was about respect, about fear, about survival. Finally, slowly, hesitantly, the gun lowered. The man's fingers trembled on the grip as if letting go might shatter him. My son's eyes never left his. One moment of hesitation, and the man seemed to shrink under the weight of my son's authority. "You should leave," my son said quietly. "Before someone gets hurt, before you do something you can't undo." The man nodded rapidly, fumbling the words. "Why, yes, I understand," he stammered, and then, almost in disbelief at his own survival, he turned and ran. I exhaled in a long, shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My knees felt weak, and I sank onto the driveway, overwhelmed by the relief and terror all at once. My son didn't move immediately. He scanned the street, checking corners, checking doors, assessing every angle just as he always did. I felt a mix of awe and fear, this calm, precise control. It wasn't just bravery. It was training, experience, a life spent preparing for situations I couldn't even imagine. I realized then something I hadn't understood before. The threat wasn't over when the man ran. The lesson had been delivered. Respect and caution were earned, not demanded. And my son had just proven why you never underestimate anyone ever. I finally spoke, voice trembling. "I can't believe that just happened. He actually pulled a gun." My son gave me a small, almost wry smile. "And now you know why I always say, never underestimate people, especially me." I laughed nervously, relief washing over me in waves. The absurdity of the situation, the idea of a HOA officer thinking he could intimidate a Navy SEAL, hit me in full force. And yet, beneath the humor, there was a lingering tension. This had almost gone horribly wrong. And I knew, deep down, it was only a matter of time before the neighborhood gossip caught wind of it. As we walked back into the house, my heart still racing, I realized the truth. Nothing would ever feel ordinary again. Not letters from the HOA, not parking disputes, not even casual drives down our street. Because now I had seen what it really meant to have someone you trust standing between you and danger, and it had changed everything. The man was gone, running down the street like a cartoon character who had just realized reality had teeth. I stood there, heart still hammering, trying to process what had just happened. My son, calm as ever, turned to me with that half-smile he always had when he was amused but didn't want to show it. "You okay, Dad?" he asked. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream at the sheer absurdity of it all. But all I could do was nod, my knees threatening to buckle. I realized something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. We had just survived a situation that could have ended in tragedy, and my son had handled it like it was nothing. But the chaos wasn't over. The second the man disappeared from view, my mind went into overdrive. Who was he really? How had he gotten a gun? And most importantly, would he come back? As if on cue, my phone buzzed. I picked it up, hoping it was just a neighbor checking in, but instead it was a text from someone I didn't know. "You think this is over? HOA rules must be enforced. Expect a visit soon." My blood ran cold. I looked at my son, who raised an eyebrow and smirked. "You see, even now they're trying to act like they're in charge." I laughed nervously. A text, really? They couldn't even handle it face to face. "Texts are safer," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the street like a predator tracking prey. "They're not thinking, they're panicking." Panic, that was the right word. Even though the man had tried to act tough, I could see he was terrified. And that terrified me because it meant they would escalate. They always do. I went inside to check the driveway from the window. Everything seemed normal again, the sun glinting on the asphalt, the birds returning to their morning songs. But I knew normal had left for good. That man and everyone who sent him had seen what we were capable of, and now they would think twice before ever testing us again. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd try again. My son's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was annoyed, amused, or both. "It's just another one of them," he said. "Probably trying to report me for something ridiculous. Parking again, maybe, or lawn height, who knows?" I chuckled, but it was hollow. "You're joking, right?" He shook his head. "Nope, they're desperate. That's why they sent someone like him, someone who looks official but is barely trained, barely thinking, fully underestimating what they're walking into." I felt a wave of both pride and fear. Pride because my son was incredible, calm, prepared, untouchable. Fear because the world had gone insane. A HOA letter could almost get someone shot. We sat in silence for a moment, listening. The neighborhood seemed peaceful again, but every creak, every distant engine, every rustle of leaves felt like a potential threat. My nerves wouldn't settle, and neither would the HOA. Finally, I spoke. "So what now? Do we call the police? Report this guy?" My son leaned back, crossing his arms. "No, not yet. Let them think they won. Let them feel that sense of power they don't have. They've already learned their first lesson. Don't underestimate me, or anyone in this house." I realized he was right. Sometimes the most powerful thing wasn't confrontation. It was patience, control, and letting the other person reveal themselves. He had disarmed the threat without firing a shot, without escalating into something truly dangerous. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. Only you could turn a gun-wielding HOA nut into, what? A lesson in humility. He smirked. "Exactly. Lesson number 1, never pull a gun on a Navy SEAL. Lesson number 2, never mess with my family." Just then I noticed something in the driveway, a faint scratch on my son's truck. Small, almost unnoticeable. But it told me one thing: the HOA, or whoever they sent, had been sloppy. Nervous. They weren't organized, they weren't smart, and they definitely hadn't anticipated what they were walking into. And that realization hit me harder than the confrontation itself. These people had underestimated us. And underestimating us would be the last mistake they ever made. I sank into the couch, exhausted but buzzing with adrenaline. Relief, fear, pride, humor, every emotion collided at once. The world outside seemed calm, but I knew this was far from over. This was just the beginning. And somehow I trusted that with my son here, we could survive whatever ridiculous chaos the HOA, or anyone else, threw at us next. By the time evening rolled in, the neighborhood seemed calm again. But calm, I've learned, is always deceptive when you're dealing with an HOA that thinks authority comes with a badge they don't deserve. I kept glancing out the window, my nerves taut, because I knew one thing for certain. The man with the gun wasn't working alone. Or at least, he hadn't expected to face someone like my son. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I noticed cars slowly driving by our house, stopping just long enough for me to catch their reflection in the windows. A subtle warning, or maybe just neighborhood nosiness, but something felt off. Then my phone buzzed. Another text. "Your son should watch his back. HOA rules are serious." I laughed nervously at first. "Rules are serious? Really? They're threatening us over parking." My voice cracked, half hysteria, half disbelief. My son, calm as ever, glanced at the message and smirked. "They're panicking. That's why it's coming in texts now. They're scared. They're realizing they messed up and they're trying to save face." I sank into the couch, shaking my head. "Scared? You mean the guy who pulled a gun? He's scared." My son nodded. "Yep, and if they send anyone else, they'll regret it, trust me." Just then I heard a knock at the door, not a polite knock, a rapid, almost urgent pounding. I froze, looking at my son. His eyes narrowed, scanning the street outside through the window. "Stay calm," he whispered. I wanted to scream, to bolt, to tell whoever it was to leave, but my body refused to move. The pounding came again, louder, more impatient. I could hear voices now, muffled but urgent. Someone was trying to intimidate us. Someone thought they could push their luck again. My son moved smoothly, like a shadow. He opened the door a crack, just enough to see who was outside without exposing himself. I saw a man in a cheap HOA uniform, nervous, twitchy, glancing around as if expecting backup that wasn't coming. "You again," my son said calmly, his tone almost amused. The man stammered, Sir, we received complaints." My son raised an eyebrow. "Complaints about what?" The man hesitated. "Parking, lawn, property violations." His voice faltered, and he looked like he might collapse under his own fear. I could barely contain my laughter, though I tried. This is absurd, I thought. This is peak HOA madness. My son took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Listen carefully. You pulled a gun earlier. You thought you had authority. You thought you were in charge. You are not. And if you ever try that again—" He let the threat hang in the air without finishing it, and I could see the man's face pale further. The man stumbled back. Yes, sir." My son's gaze swept the street. "Good, now leave, and don't let me see you here again." The man bolted, tripping over the curb as he ran. I felt relief wash over me, but my son didn't relax. He scanned the street once more, like a predator making sure the territory was safe. I sank onto the couch, overwhelmed. "I can't believe this. They're actually afraid of you." My son gave me a small, wry smile. "Not afraid, respectful. There's a difference. People underestimate what they don't understand. They think uniforms give them power. I just showed them that actions, experience, and control matter more." I laughed quietly, "All over parking." He shrugged. "It's never about parking. It's about ego, about thinking you can intimidate people, about thinking rules mean more than consequences." And in that moment, I realized just how lucky we were. The danger might have been ridiculous over a minor HOA dispute, but the lesson was real. Respect has to be earned, threats don't work, and a Navy SEAL living in your house, that helps. Just when I thought the tension might ease, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This one was different, short, sharp, and filled with venom. "You think this is over. You've only delayed the inevitable." I looked at my son. His eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of amusement. "They don't understand yet," he said quietly, "but they're about to learn." I felt a mix of dread and exhilaration. The HOA might be ridiculous, but they weren't going to quit, and neither were we. The night stretched on, heavy with unspoken tension, every creak of a branch outside, every distant engine making me jump. But my son, he stayed calm, steady, a fortress of control. And I realized something. With him here, I could survive anything, even the most absurd, terrifying HOA nonsense imaginable. The night air had a strange stillness to it, heavy, almost expectant, like the calm before a storm. I sat on the couch, trying to steady my nerves, but my eyes kept darting to the windows. Every shadow seemed alive, every distant sound amplified 100-fold, and I knew, deep down, the HOA wasn't finished. My son leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes scanning the street with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. I could feel his presence like a shield, calm, controlled, unshakable. But the tension was still in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. Then we heard it, tires crunching gravel. My heart sank. Another car, slow and deliberate, rolling into the driveway. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the familiar yet terrifying insignia of someone trying to assert authority, a cheap imitation of law enforcement just like before. "Here we go again," my son muttered, a hint of a smirk on his face. "They really don't learn." I barely breathed as the car stopped. Two men stepped out this time, uniforms slightly different, badges shiny but fake, hands twitching near pockets where weapons might be hidden. They looked confident, at least at first glance, but my son didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed and the air seemed to shift. "Evening, gentlemen," he said casually, as if he were greeting old friends. But the tone carried weight, silent, deadly, unyielding. The men froze. I noticed it immediately. Confidence draining from their posture, uncertainty creeping in. "We're here to enforce the HOA rules," one of them said, voice tight, trying to sound authoritative. "We need—" My son raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "You need to leave, now, before things get complicated." Complicated, I realized I had underestimated the power of that single word. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The men hesitated, glancing at each other, confusion and fear flickering across their faces. I wanted to scream, to tell them to just leave, but I couldn't. My son was in control now, and I had learned not to interfere. This wasn't just about a parking dispute anymore. This was about respect, authority, and survival. One of the men finally spoke again, voice shaking. We were told to." "You were told wrong," my son interrupted smoothly. "Do you see what happened last time? Do you see the mistake you're making?" The second man's hand twitched toward a weapon, and my heart leapt into my throat. But my son didn't move aggressively. He didn't need to. He just tilted his head, subtle, deliberate eyes locking onto the man. The silence stretched like an eternity. Then finally the first man stuttered, We're leaving." My son nodded slowly. "Good, that's the right decision." And with that, the two men stumbled back to their car, terrified, fumbling like children who had just been caught in something far beyond their comprehension. The engine roared to life, tires spun, and they were gone before I could even exhale. I sank into the couch, shaking, heart still racing. I can't believe that just happened, twice in one night. My son laughed quietly, a low, controlled chuckle. They weren't ready. They didn't understand the situation. They thought uniforms gave them power. They didn't count on experience, control, and strategy. I shook my head, a mixture of relief and awe washing over me. It's insane. A HOA dispute almost turned into disaster, he finished calmly. Yes, but it didn't and it won't, not while we handle it. The silence returned, heavy, but this time it felt different. Triumphant almost. The threat had been neutralized. The HOA had been exposed for what they were, unprepared, overconfident, and utterly unqualified to deal with anything serious. I realized something then. This was never about parking or letters or rules. This was about testing boundaries, seeing who would back down. And now, after tonight, the boundaries had been redrawn. My son glanced at me, eyes softening slightly. "Are you okay?" he asked, almost like a parent checking on me instead of the other way around. I nodded, still trembling slightly. "Yeah, I think so, thanks to you." He smiled faintly. "You don't need to thank me, that's what family is for, and sometimes showing people their limits is the only way to survive." I looked out the window one last time. The street was quiet now, shadows long and deep, but I knew the lesson had been learned. The HOA wouldn't bother us again, not seriously, not after seeing what happens when you push the wrong family. And for the first time that night, I let myself breathe. Slowly, deeply, the storm had passed, the tension had broken, and I knew somehow that we had not only survived, but we had won. But even as I sat there, heart still racing, I couldn't shake the thought. In a world full of people who underestimate what they don't understand, the next challenge was always waiting, and we would be ready. Morning came slowly after the long night. The sunlight spilled across the driveway, illuminating every detail of our small battlefield, the tire tracks, the faint scratches on the truck, even the cracks in the curb where the HOA thug had tripped in his panic. I rubbed my eyes and let out a long breath, still feeling the adrenaline from the previous night's chaos. My son was already outside, leaning casually against the truck, surveying the street like a general inspecting a battlefield. I couldn't help but laugh softly. "You make this look effortless," I said. He shrugged, one eyebrow raised. "Experience, Dad, and nerves of steel." I shook my head. Nerves of steel? That was insane. They actually tried it again, knowing what happened yesterday. He gave me a faint grin. "That's the problem with people who think rules give them power. They don't see the person behind the rules." We stepped outside together, and for the first time since yesterday morning, the neighborhood felt ordinary again. Lawns neatly trimmed, mailboxes in a row, birds chirping. But I knew better. Things had changed, not just for the HOA, but for us. They had learned the hard way that we weren't to be underestimated. I noticed a car creeping slowly down the street. A neighbor, probably. My son squinted and the car sped away as soon as he noticed us. The fear of the HOA had spread like wildfire. The entire neighborhood seemed on edge. And honestly, I couldn't stop smiling. We walked to the mailbox to check the day's mail, fully expecting more threats or letters dripping with self-importance. But there was nothing, just the usual bills, advertisements, and a check from a client. No HOA letters, no new enforcement notices. Nothing. "Looks like victory," I said, grinning. "Not just yet," my son said, eyes scanning the street again. "Victory isn't about silence. It's about making sure people remember, making sure they understand the cost of underestimating someone." I laughed, shaking my head in awe. "I think they learned that last night." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "Maybe, but some lessons take repetition. Some people never learn until the consequences hit them personally." Just then I noticed movement in the distance, a small group of neighbors standing across the street, whispering, pointing at our house. I could feel the tension in the air, a mixture of gossip and fear. The HOA's reputation, such as it was, had cracked. People were starting to see the ridiculousness of the whole thing. I turned to my son. "So, what now? Are we going to be quiet and let them stew?" He smiled faintly. "We wait, we let them talk, and when they think they've won, we remind them again, calmly, efficiently, without chaos. That's how you handle fools who mistake authority for competence." I laughed. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," he said quietly, tone serious now. "It's calculated and it works every time." I felt a mix of pride and awe. The man who had pulled a gun on us yesterday, gone. The fake enforcement, terrified. The HOA, exposed for what they truly were, overconfident, incompetent, and completely unprepared to deal with reality. We walked back toward the house, side by side, sharing the quiet satisfaction of victory. There was humor in it too, the sheer absurdity of what had happened. But beneath the laughter, there was a deeper lesson I wouldn't forget. Courage isn't just about facing danger. It's about control, experience, and protecting what matters most. As I stepped onto the porch, I glanced back at the street one last time. The sun glinted off the asphalt, shadows stretching long and serene. For a moment, the world felt peaceful, safe. And I knew, for the first time since this entire ordeal began, that we had not just survived the insanity of HOA arrogance, we had won. My son turned to me, eyes warm but unwavering. "Remember this, Dad. People who underestimate you will always exist. The difference is knowing how to respond. Calm, controlled, and with purpose. That's the difference between chaos and victory." I nodded, feeling the weight of the lesson sink in. The adrenaline, the fear, the humor, the absurdity, it all came together in one sharp, unforgettable experience. And as we stepped inside, leaving the quiet street behind, I realized something profound. No letter, no HOA rule, no fake officer with a gun could ever intimidate us again. Not when we understood our strength. Not when we had the courage, the skill, and the clarity to face the ridiculousness head-on. For the first time in days, I sat back and truly exhaled. We had faced chaos, absurdity, and danger, and come out on top. And somehow, the entire neighborhood would never forget it. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.